I'm on a quest to find music and art. Supporting local talent is the place I start. Yeah, this is our culture, the place to be. Games, books, arts, and crafts, and jewelry. This the guardians of the geekery. 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 And now for today's episode of Guardians of the Geekery with your hosts, Matt, Carol, and Joey.
Oh my goodness, Guardians of the Geekery back again with a Geekery Market edition. Geekery Market coming at you when? Good old Saturday, November 9th, 2024, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Over 30,000 square feet of geeky goodness inside. So it's rain or shine. We got you covered. Over 2,000 parking spaces. Oh my gosh, there's never enough parking at these events. Am I right? Absolutely crazy. And then, of course, our charity partner is Second Harvest Food Bank. Metrolina do fantastic work. Please bring a non-perishable food item. But hey, we're really excited to welcome Juliet Rose.
So, Juliet, this is your first time being part of the Geekery Market. Welcome to the crazy.
Yes.
He's like, I have no idea what I signed up for.
I think I'll fit right in. Trust me.
Angel popped up there, and I almost went because I thought it was a cat, and then of course Artemis came up here to.
Yeah. So for those of you who are listening, the audio podcast version, my dog Angel has popped her head in to the screen, and of course licked my nose. And if you haven't seen Carol's cat's cats, you will. But feel free to watch it as well on either YouTube or our main page. Just don't do it while you're driving. Please.
Yeah, if you see my hands go up like this, it's because I'm covering the computer, trying to keep them from coming to the front, because they see the computer turn on and they're like, "Oh, it's showtime."
Yeah,
it could be a drinking game. Yeah, it could be a drinking game. There's Carol's cat or Angel.
Of course, Carol's cat is addicted to Mikey Mason's Cat album, as well as his hit song LAMB, which for those who, if you have children, cover your ears, look at my butthole.
Please look at my butthole. Yes. So yeah, I tried to shield the camera whenever they turn around to I'm sorry.
None of what we're saying is anything about Juliet, and we just got her started talking about our guest, her off at the leg, so we'll talk about that later. But welcome, Juliet. So you call your collection of books Above the Rain. So talk to us a little bit about the style of book that you write, some of the titles that you have. Just tell us about you.
Sure. So Above the Rain Collective is actually our publishing house. And what our goal with that is to branch out to other authors, which we started this year. So it started with me. I was the guinea pig. And then from there, we went ahead and we did our first anthology, published another author working on our second anthology. So that kind of is a collective of everything that we do. And that's why we called it that, because we really want it to be more of like a co-op versus kind of like an unreachable publisher. My goal is really to give authors voices. And so kind of going back to where it started, and with me, is I actually had 3 failed contracts for my books between 2020 and 2022. All 3 of my contracts fell apart. One publisher folded, one just had some weird clauses that I decided I didn't want to go forward with. And the third one just kind of quit communicating to all of us, stopped paying royalties, everything. So that was really where this kind of stemmed out of. I really wanted to, first I decided to do it for myself, because I was like, I'm done. I got so burned. I was like, I'm done. But then I really wanted to also prevent that from happening with other authors. So that's where we're branched out. But so for me, I currently have 10 published books under Above the Rain. I write anything, I'm cross genre, so I kind of write anything that pops in my head. So we say I'm definitely dark fiction. So everything kind of has this dark twist, suspense or thriller or horror. So all of my stories kind of have that to them. But I go anywhere from contemporary fiction all the way into horror, direct horror. And right now I'm working on kind of a sci-fi story. So I don't really have a genre I cleave to. I really just, whatever pops in my head and that story has to be told, then I tell it. So yeah, and some of my titles, my first one I wrote, which was with one of the publishers, was Do Over, and that's contemporary suspense. And then that had a follow-up book called We Don't Matter. I never intended to write that book. There was just a character in Do Over that was like, yeah, I'm not done. I have a story to tell. So I don't write series, but I do have those two books that are connected, and that's We Don't Matter. And so they have connected characters. Everything else I do is standalone.
That's awesome. So what was your first published work? Was that the Do Over?
That was Do Over.
That was
Yeah.
Do Over? Yeah. So what is the anthology that you're putting together? What type of stories are in that anthology?
Yeah, so I had one that published earlier this year, and that was Final Passenger. So all of those had stories that had to do with, it's horror, like speculative horror, but like with some type of passenger. And that's as far as I said it. It just had to have that kind of element in there. So we have anything from people on submarines to trains to taxi cabs to buses, whatever it is, and they all have a horror element to them. So that was Final Passenger, and that came out in May. The one we're working on now is called Devour the Rich. Which I think kind of goes without saying what it's about. So we're just asking people to submit stories about, revenge on bosses, bad jobs, things like that, but also falling into the horror genre.
And when is that coming out?
We're slated for January of next year.
I feel like there's a ton of stories out there. Anytime Joey shows me TikTok, there's all those role planes, and it's all these horror stories of work. And I'm like, I'm so thankful I don't work at a place like that any longer.
Yes. I think we all have a story like that. That's why it came from, literally within a 6-month period, everyone in my household, so 4 adults, lost their jobs. And so it came from that, like, from being laid off to jobs closing to whatever it was. All 4 of us lost our jobs and had to find new jobs. And so a lot of it kind of came from that frustration, and then talking to other people on the same boat who are like, yeah, I'm going through the same thing. And I was like, I think we need to write this book.
Yeah. Definitely.
Did you find it difficult to go from being an author to actually opening a publishing house?
I think
Did you
because
have
I've
to
taken it
learn everything?
Yeah, I've taken it really slowly, and I think that's helped. Like I was never in a rush to do any of this. And my goal was always just to kind of go at my own pace and teach myself. And, got my editing certifications to the Poynter Institute. I really wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing before I dared take somebody else on. So it was pretty natural when the time came. I was definitely ready at that point. And starting with the anthology helped because, I was working with multiple authors, and different stories, and there's a little less kind of like rigidity, whatever, in working in an anthology. And so like, that was why I started with that.
And if someone's going to start reading your books, what do you normally point them to as a starter?
That's a tough one because it depends on what they like. So that's my first question is, what do you typically read?
Because you are a writer that writes everything.
Everything. So they're like, I love horror. Then I put them more that direction. If they're like, yeah, I really like, especially if they say I don't like horror, which I get a lot. Then I'll point them more to like the contemporary suspense type books.
Do you have any advice for young writers out there or new writers out there? What advice would you give them to just get started?
My advice is to ignore all advice. Like there's just too many people telling you what to do, and that really, I think it gets people frozen because then they're like, well, they told me this, and then they told me this, and so my goal is just, hey, just put it down and don't worry about what people are telling you. That comes later. But if you get stunted in that initial kind of creativity, you may never move forward.
And were you always a writer? Did you write stories as a young kid?
Yeah, I was that kid. I was the kid that I read, obviously, like just all the time. I was the earliest reader in my class. I was the earliest reader in my family. I was a reader. And from there, I started telling stories. So like getting off the bus, and the kids would always ask me to tell stories because like, I guess they figured out that I would always tell a story versus like just something that happened. So I would usually start with the truth, like this is what my family did this weekend, and I would turn it into a lie. And before long, there was creatures and things that were getting involved in what we did last weekend. And like, so they were always like, tell us a story, And then when I kind of put it all together between reading and then telling the stories that like people write, like that was a job. I got really excited and went to my mother. I was 10 and I said, I want to be a writer. And so she bought me my first typewriter then, and I kind of started packing away at that time.
Awesome. I'm out of questions. Next up.
Well, actually, I was going to ask you how you came up with the name Above the Rain. I mean, I think I have some guesses, but I'd love to know a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it very much is kind of what it sounds like, going through, I've been through one a lot personally in my life. I lost a child to cancer. I lost my mother to cancer when I was a child. I went through an abusive household and I moved out when I was 16. I was always kind of like just trying to get kind of above the rain. Like I was trying to get past all of these struggles to find myself, because it was really hard to know who I was when I was kind of always in survival mode. And so when I sat down to do this and I really thought about what I was also trying to do for other people, it was that let's get past survival mode and like, let's be successful. And that's kind of where Above the Ring came from.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is a very good mindset to have.
I love it. Although it reminds me of a story of, because everything reminds me of a story, but I once was flying from, I've been on a business trip and flying from Florida to Boston, and there was a storm coming in. So the captain announced that he was going to do quite a vertical takeoff just so that he could get above the rain as soon as possible, because if he could get above it, he felt like he could get us, past the storm and we wouldn't have any delays or anything like that. So I was sitting, I had traveled a lot by that point. I was sitting next to somebody else who also, in talking with him, he was a big traveler. And we were just kind of chit-chatting like, this is what happens, no big deal, right? And we, all of a sudden, they take off and we are back, like a lot more noticeably back than other planes I've done, and everybody who was kind of chit-chatting, everything got really quiet, but clearly there was a mother on board who had told her child, it's going to be like a roller coaster. And all of a sudden, out of this quiet cabin, you hear the voice go, "Wee!"
Aww. I love that.
Started laughing. And sometimes you need that humor to kind of get through a precarious and somewhat frightening situation, where you're trying to be like the adult and be all brave, but sometimes you just have to admit this is a bit of an adventure, folks. Let's admit it and embrace it that way. And so I always kind of hear that. I have that little voice in the back of my head whenever things get really kind of dark and scary for a minute, of that little kid just going, "Ooh,
That's
like, what's gonna happen next?" So the fact that you're able to kind of take a tumultuous life and turn it a little bit into, hey, we can have revenge on our bosses and we can have,
exactly,
but in a way that's not going to get us locked up in jail. So I'm good with that.
Yeah, that's the goal. Don't get locked up in jail. So
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, they always say it's the quiet little old ladies that write the biggest horror stories, right? So I feel like I always have to be looking innocuous, because whenever my book comes out, then people will be like, Joey didn't write that. Joey is all sunshine and fuzzy bunnies and all sorts of kind of stuff like that. So but so now, what are you working on currently? What are you are there any books that are going to be released between now, which is August, to the show in November?
I'm really hoping to have the current book that I'm working on out by then. I was actually hoping to release it for that event. It's more of a sci-fi, but it kind of gets into, I always do dark fiction. So it gets in, like, what I'm writing is basically a story about these kids that live on this island, and they don't really know their history. They just know they're on this island and they're under the care of this woman, Miss Virginia, and her kind of slew of robots. She's not a terribly nice person. Kind of falls into that, I guess, trope of like the orphanage idea, but they all have some form of disability. And so the oldest kid is the main character, and he's 15 turning 16. And when they turn 16, they get sent away to an adult camp. But he comes to find out that there really actually isn't an adult camp. Something else happens to them. And so he plans an escape. And so that's the story. I won't say any more than that, but there is one robot that he befriends, and that is different than the other robots. The other ones are very much like under her control. This one isn't. And so he has this robot that helps him with this escape. And then what happens from there will kind of weave its way, because I never really go in with a really firm idea on a story. I always go with like a loose idea and then see what the story tells me. And that's kind of where I'm at. Is I'm about 100 pages in now, and I'm just letting the story tell me where it's going.
That's awesome.
Cool. That's awesome. I don't know. I've met different types of writers. I've met writers that are very rigid in they have to outline everything and everything must go as planned. And then I've met a lot of writers like you that it's like, well, I have this idea. Let's just see where it goes.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that method of writing, just let it kind of organically flow.
Absolutely. And when I was in school, teachers were like, you got to write an outline. And it really, I struggled with that because like what I felt was once I started doing the outline, I lost the creative story. So like by doing that, it actually stopped me from doing what I needed to do. So as a writer now, when I do stuff, like I said, I'll go in, I let things simmer in my brain for a while before I actually start the writing process. So by the time I sit down, a lot has kind of simmered into an idea that I can move forward with. I have characters, generally information about them, maybe some backstory, and then some plot ideas. But a lot of times, like I'll sit down, like say today after this, I'll probably sit down to write a chapter. I don't really know where that chapter's going. I know where it's starting. Like I know where it's gonna start, but then like by the end of it, a lot of times it changes what I even think is gonna happen.
That's so exciting. I used to write comic books, and I would find the same thing. I'd actually do a little rough outline, but then yeah, a character would start writing itself like when you get in that zone, and it's like whatever that creativity that hits you during your writing session, and it's just like wow, you just the first time that happens, I just remember being like, what is going on here? This is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I feel that way every time. Sometimes I'm just like, ooh, as it's happening. It's not, I feel like it's not happening like through me. Like I'm just, like recording what is going on. So I get really excited sometimes. And then sometimes it randomly ties together when you never thought it would. Like when I wrote one of my stories, Catch the Earth, I just was picking names and different elements. The story starts in Idaho with plane crash, ends up in Ireland. And like there were things that I picked, and when I actually did some research on like names, even somehow they weirdly tied into the story, even though I never meant them to. Like with that story, I used the name Riordan or Riordan, however you pronounce it, which is an Irish name. And if you start researching it, lions have a lot to do with it. Well, I had already started weaving lions into the story anyway, and never intended for those. Like I just picked a name, and it somehow tied in. And I get so excited. I was like, it's almost like sometimes you feel like someone is speaking through you when you're writing, if you get into that zone.
Yeah. Wow.
So do you write full time or is this like a side project?
It's a side project. I do have a full-time day job. I do it when I can, when my brain's engaged. I try to prioritize it. So like I do try to write a certain amount a week. I used to write every day. But I worked remote at the time. And so like I felt like I had a little more like time where I wasn't commuting or I wasn't having to do stuff. Yeah. Now I work at the library. I'm a librarian. So I don't have as much time. So as long as I knock out probably 3 or 4 days a week, and even just something, I feel like I'm meeting that goal.
All right. So you're a librarian. As somebody who is a writer, not an author yet, do you ever go down the aisle in the library where your books would be and see what other writers would be before and after you? Or is it just me? Am I the only one that did that?
I haven't, but I'm thinking like, okay, like who would be there? I haven't, but I mean, I'm definitely in a good place with Rose. I feel like there's a lot of kind of like, you got your Roberts, you got your Riordan, you got your, you have quite a few authors in and around there. So I feel like I could be in good company.
I used to go into Barnes and Noble and kind of, I have, my pen name and was kind of like, okay, who am I going to be in between? Because I might have to compete against, I guess it just shows that marketing is more of my thing because like, who am I going to be between that I need to like, make sure that I've got a title that's going to stand out from theirs. But yeah, I was just curious. Okay. So it's just me. I'll just take that. I'll just trot on back home now. Thank you.
I think it matters though, because I mean, you have people that go to a bookstore to a library with a real intent, like I'm going to buy this book, but you have a lot of browsers, and putting yourself somewhere where you would be between maybe more famous people actually could be more beneficial than competitive, because people are already browsing, they're browsing there and they happen to browse onto your book because it's right there, so yeah, I think it definitely could be beneficial.
Yeah, I think there were 2 things that I used to do, especially when I was in knee deep in writing, and I have this book and I put it away for a while and I need to go back and finish it because the story still lives in my head. Like you said, it kind of, but I just need to sit down. The problem is I know the beginning and I know the end. and there's a journey in between, and there's two groups of people and they have to meet, and that's the part that I get a little stymied on because they have other journeys. And so I've realized that maybe they're not going to meet in the first book, maybe they might meet in the second or the third, so I might just have to deal with that. But I know where I want it to end, or I know where I want this part of the story to end. But yeah, so I had the NaNoWriMo, so I used to write during lunch and then I'd type it up every night and do all that kind of stuff. But I had a point and I totally lost myself in my own story because I started thinking about it. But but yes, so like part of it was I would go to the bookstore and kind of see where I would be. But also just kind of figuring out, what story do I want to tell that not everybody else is telling? So, the other thing I would do is I would go, I worked a night job where a lot of my job was waiting. So, I worked for a company that used to sell eyeglasses, and you would have the stores that closed at 6 o'clock, the downtown stores and stuff like that. And then you had all the ones that were at the mall at closed at 9 and 10. And whatever they sold that day, we'd immediately ship out the replacement frames. But anyway, so I'd pick up these. I was just reading like every single night because you're just sitting there from 6 o'clock to 9:30. You're running reports, but you're not really doing anything. But they need somebody to It was a great job. It was a great job. But I kept a couple books because I had picked them up at like CVS or Walgreens or whatever, because I hadn't had a chance to go by the library. I hadn't hit any yard sales lately, and I picked up this one book and it was the worst written book I'd ever read in my life. And I kept it because I'm like, whenever I finish this book, I'm going to submit it to this publishing house because they accept anything.
That's funny.
It was the worst written book, like literally the dialogue and the descriptions were just so repetitive. It was like I saw him coming and I could tell he wasn't happy. And then you don't look happy, I said. I was like, this is terrible. But it was a good, like, whoever wrote the back of the book, it was by a dispatcher who had worked with like criminal cases, tracking down like child endangerment or whatever. And it kind of, and the artwork was great. It was like a kid's red sneaker kind of discarded in the middle of the street with the street light on it and the rain. And, it was very evocative where you were like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a compelling mystery. And yet the first 100 pages, it was one of the first books that I just never finished. I couldn't finish it because it was just so terrible. So yeah. So I used to look and see where I'd be placed, and then I would read books and say, okay, if they would accept her, they might accept me. So let me keep this book. Because there's a future for me there. But
actually, it brings up another question. You just mentioned the good cover. Do you do your own cover art, or do you have an in-house artist that does the cover art for your books?
So I do all the layout and design for the covers. I do sometimes get other artists' work. So say with Carrying the Dead, the cover there was another artist, and I took his work and then I used it on the cover, but I did the layout. For By the Dimming Light, which was my most recent book, I actually, it was weird. I was writing this book and then I just happened to follow this artist on Instagram because someone had shared her work and I loved it. And so like I had started following her maybe like a year or so ago. And so I had this book and I didn't really have a cover for it yet. I had some ideas in my head, but I hadn't really decided on something. And one day I was just kind of scrolling and saw she had posted a picture and it was like something she had put on clearance. She was going to move on out. And it literally was perfect for the book. And so I was like, So I wrote her and said, I see that you're selling the original. Could I buy it for the book cover? And she was like, yeah. And so we worked out a deal. I ended up buying both, the original and because I just liked it that much. And I had her make one small change, which was the creature on the front cover had at the time yellow eyes, but in the story it has red eyes. So I said, would you mind? Would that be, if not, it's not a big deal. She's like, no, I can do that. She goes, I can't change a lot, but I can change the color of the eyes. And so she did that. So like I used her artwork for that cover of that book. I am an artist and I'm a graphic artist. So sometimes I'll take a photograph or I'll do something myself and then use that for the covers. But I am like the person that kind of does the final like layout for the books.
That's awesome. We mentioned the butthole. There it is. And the cat walks across the screen.
Aw.
Well, so Juliet, if people wanted to go ahead and order some of the books and pick them up at the Geekery Market, they would just go on your normal website and just put in the notes that they're going to be there at the market if they wanted to save on the shipping or whatever, correct?
Yeah, they can go to the abovetheraincollective.com, which is our publisher website. And then, but what I would recommend is emailing me directly, because I give a deal for cons and stuff like that. Like, so I have like the set price on the website, but if they're interested in getting any books, you can shoot me an email. I also have my website, authorjulietrose.com, that has all my contacts there as well. So either way, if you're interested in getting something for that, just reach out to me, because like I said, I do con deals for my books.
Yeah. So that would be great. So, well, thank you so much for being on this episode. And we look forward to seeing you at your first Geekery Market. So welcome to the Geekery family.
Thank you.
And make sure to look out for Juliet of both her anthologies as well as the book she's written. And you'll have to ask her if that new book got finished in time for the market.
I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best.
No pressure. No pressure. But definitely check her out and make sure to join us on Saturday, November 9th for the Geekery Market. Well, thank you, Juliet.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was an episode of Guardians of the Geekery. Thank you for listening. Check us out at guardiansofthegeekery.com and stay tuned for more content.